Every wolf in the Northern Realm knew two truths. Alpha King Theron's dominance was absolute, and he would never take a Luna. He was the king of granite, fire, and unquestioned command, a force of nature who moved kingdoms, which is why the world stopped spinning the moment he stepped into a dusty, forgotten town and froze. He didn't see the thousands of kneeling wolves. His eyes, the color of Arctic ice and molten gold, locked onto the one wolf who had spent 7 years trying to become invisible. Lana, the broken, the scarred, the Omega who had already been rejected. Part 1. The Scarred Omega. The scar wasn't just a puckered silver line tracing the edge of Lana's left ear. It was a permanent branding on her soul. Every werewolf could scent the ghost of rejection clinging to her like a shroud, a faint, acrid reminder that she was incomplete, broken, and unmated. 7 years. 7 years since the night the world went silent and the fire in her chest turned to ash. Caleb, a low-ranking beta in a minor border pack, hadn't needed ceremony when he tore the words from his throat. I, Caleb of the Crescent Moon Pack, reject you, Lana, as my fated mate. The emotional and physical blow had been so complete that it shattered her Omega-level submissiveness, leaving behind a cold, self-sufficient solitude. The pack doctors had called her lucky. Most Omegas faded entirely after such a brutal severing of the most sacred bond. But Lana simply stopped caring. She took the small severance fund, moved to the sleepy, forgotten town of Redwood Bluff on the King's Territory periphery, and bought a tiny cabin next to a creek. Her life was now a deliberate tapestry of the mundane. Tending her small garden, reading outdated books, and keeping her windows locked against the world, lest any ambitious rogue catch the scent of a weakened wolf. She was safe, she was alone, and she was finally undamaged by expectation. The moon goddess had played her cruel joke. Lana had packed up the pieces and refused a second audience. The one thing she had never factored into her quiet exile was the king. Whispers started 2 days before the official arrival. They traveled faster than the fastest runner, carried on the panicked air of wolves who knew what true, unyielding dominance felt like. Alpha King Theron, the king of the Northern Territories, was coming. Theron was not a king of pleasantries and politics. He was a king forged in fire and blood, a man whose wolf was said to be the size of a small vehicle, whose command could snap the will of even the strongest alphas. He ruled without mercy and without question, and for years he had refused to take a Luna. No wolf, no matter how powerful or beautiful, had ever met his impenetrable standards. The realm whispered that the moon goddess herself had hidden his mate, fearing the unparalleled power of their combined force. Lana felt a creeping dread. King Theron was holding a formal summit in the main town square, addressing the territorial shifts caused by a recent rogue incursion. Every single wolf in the region, from the lowest Omegas to the highest-ranking pack leaders, was formally commanded to attend. Even Lana, the self-exiled Omega, had received the royal summons sealed with the king's crest, a stylized wolf's head with eyes that seemed to pierce stone. To disobey the Alpha King was not an option. It was a death sentence. She pulled on her thick, hand-knitted shawl, pulling the fabric high to deliberately mask the faint silver line by her ear. It was a meaningless gesture. The rejection scent would still be there, but it was a small act of defiance she afforded herself. The town square was a sea of nervous shifters, a palpable wave of anticipation and raw deference washing over the crowd. Lana stayed to the absolute farthest edge, near the old blacksmith's shed, her head bowed in the posture of utter submission expected of a wolf of her non-status. She tried to merge with the shadows, a specter among the living. Then the air shifted. It wasn't just a smell. It was a physical weight, a seismic pressure that crushed the breath from her lungs and caused the strongest nearby alphas to drop instantly to one knee. King Theron had arrived. He strode onto the raised wooden dais, and every wolf in the square, including Lana, was involuntarily slammed into a low bow by the sheer, unbridled force of his alpha command. He was a masterpiece of raw, predatory power, tall, impossibly broad, dressed in tailored black leather and deep gray furs. His hair was midnight dark, and his eyes, a shocking Arctic blue, swept over the kneeling masses with bored indifference. He began to speak, his voice a low, resonant rumble that shook the very ground. Lana, peering up from her bowed position, felt the familiar cold emptiness in her chest. His dominance was staggering. Yet it held no warmth for her, no potential for a bond. That part of her was defunct. Then, halfway through a sentence about reinforcing the northern borders, King Theron stopped. The silence that followed was so profound, it felt like the world had simply paused its rotation. Every eye remained glued to the king, whose face, usually a mask of controlled, lethal calm, had gone utterly blank. His arctic blue eyes were no longer sweeping the crowd. They were locked onto a single, peripheral spot. Lana didn't realize she was the target until she felt the shift of the air around her, the sudden focus of every single pair of eyes, terrified alphas, confused betas, and curious omegas, suddenly directed at the quiet little woman huddled by the blacksmith's shed. King Theron's massive chest hitched once. He took a staggering, slow breath, his nostrils flaring wide, drinking in the air, and then his gaze found her. Lana could not move. His eyes, now burning with a sudden, violent, molten gold fire, pierced through her shawl, through her defenses, through the years of self-imposed numbness, and settled on the place in her chest where her shattered bond should have resided. The scent hit him like a physical blow, a dizzying, intoxicating mix of wild sage, rain-soaked earth, and something uniquely, utterly hers. It was the scent of his other half, the scent the moon goddess had finally released after years of tormenting him with silence. But something was wrong. Beneath the overwhelming, perfect aroma of his fated mate was a sharp underlying taint of spoiled goods, the scent of a broken bond, of a past rejection. The confusion in his golden eyes lasted only a fraction of a second, quickly replaced by a possessiveness so terrifying and absolute it made the air crackle. King Theron dropped down from the dais, his movements fluid and lethally silent, navigating the frozen, cowering crowd. He stalked toward her, every footfall shaking the ground, the very manifestation of the king's unchallenged power. Lana, paralyzed, felt her body betraying her. Her omega roots, long suppressed by the rejection, screamed at her to flee, to submit, to dissolve into the ground. He stopped directly in front of her. His shadow enveloped her entirely. His arctic eyes, still alight with the feral gold of his wolf, were fixated on the tiny silver scar peeking from beneath her shawl. He reached out a hand the size of her head, his calloused thumb tracing the line of the rejection mark with a shocking, reverent gentleness that was completely at odds with his terrifying presence. And then his voice, no longer the distant rumble of a ruler, but a low, guttural growl that belonged only to the enraged, possessive wolf inside, filled the silence. It wasn't a question or a command, but a statement of absolute, irrefutable fact that sealed the fate of the entire northern realm. Mine. The world, for Lana, finally started to spin again, but it was centered on the furious, undeniable power of the Alpha King who had just claimed the broken, scarred Omega. Part 2. The Mate Mark and the Former Rejection. The word mine hung in the air, a physical declaration of war against the moon goddess's cruelty and the past's lingering pain. It wasn't just spoken, it was an alpha command, delivered with such absolute earth-shaking dominance that it snapped the paralyzed crowd out of their stupor. They didn't move toward the king, they recoiled, instinctively scrambling to create a massive ring of space around the two figures, the most powerful male in the realm and the suddenly unveiled treasure he had claimed. Lana's rational mind was screaming for distance, for escape, for the quiet solitude of her cabin. But her wolf, the Omega long silenced by Caleb's rejection, was humming, a deep, frightened, but undeniably alive vibration responding to the immense gravitational pull of King Theron's presence. Theron didn't wait for her consent. Consent was a human concept. The fated bond was a force of nature, and he was its apex predator. His massive hands slipped beneath her shawl and cupped the back of her head, his fingers tangling in her hair. He pulled her flush against his chest, the impact jarring the breath from her lungs. "I smell it," he growled, the vibration rumbling through her bones. The decay, the mark of the low-ranking filth who dared to break what belonged only to me. His eyes, still blazing molten gold, locked with hers. He didn't see a scarred, quiet Omega. He saw his Luna, his queen, damaged but not destroyed. And the damage only fueled a possessiveness so terrifying it threatened to overwhelm her senses. "Look at me, Lana," he commanded, his voice softening just enough to bypass her defensive wall. Her trauma-induced submissiveness, the psychological scar of rejection, fought fiercely against his innate alpha dominance. Her eyes wanted to dart away, her head wanted to sink, but the king's claim was paramount. He held her gaze captive, forcing her to confront the reality. Her destiny was no longer broken. It was terrifyingly whole. "You are mine," he repeated, but this time it was a vow, a promise to the universe itself. His thumb found the tender, pulsating spot beneath her jaw, and in an act of staggering authority, he bent his head. He didn't need a courtship. He didn't need an elaborate ceremony. He needed to overwrite the past with the present, to burn away the trace of rejection with the sacred, unyielding claim of a king. His teeth sank in, not deep enough to wound, but deep enough to draw a pinprick of blood and, more importantly, to flood her system with his Alpha King scent, his pheromones, and the undeniable power of his mark. The pain was sharp, instantaneous, but it was immediately replaced by an agonizing, blinding rush of sensation. The empty, cold space in her chest that had housed the broken bond exploded with light, heat, and a completeness she had never known, even before her rejection. It was the feeling of a fractured soul slamming perfectly into its missing half. Theron pulled back, his eyes dark with satisfaction and ferocious relief. "You are marked," he stated, his voice now calm, lethal, and undisputed. "Now you are healed." Lana felt it, an instant, shocking sense of rightness. The faint, acrid scent of rejection that had clung to her for 7 years was gone, incinerated by the king's mark, replaced by the overwhelming, protective aroma of him. She was no longer the scarred Omega. She was the Alpha King's mate. They were still standing in the main square, the thousands of wolves still kneeling in terrified deference. Theron lifted her into his arms as if she weighed nothing, his gaze sweeping over the crowd, daring any single wolf to lift its head. "This is your queen," he declared, his voice ringing across the territory, a sound that would be heard miles away. "Her pain is mine to avenge. Her loyalty is yours to earn." The king's entourage was preparing for the immediate, urgent journey back to the northern citadel. Lana was still reeling, lying enveloped in the dizzying reality of her new life, when a low, sniveling voice cut through the stunned silence. "You can't claim her. She's damaged goods." A ripple of fear and shock tore through the pack. Who was foolish enough to challenge the king at this moment? Theron's head turned slowly, the movement heavy and dangerous. His golden eyes landed on the source of the noise, a thin, nervous male dressed in the slightly ill-fitting uniform of a minor border patrol. It was Caleb. 7 years had not been kind to Lana's former mate. He was drawn, desperate, and the inherent arrogance that had allowed him to reject her had intensified, morphing into a bitter entitlement. He had heard the news of the king's claim, and the news had driven him mad. He saw a chance for status, a path out of the monotony of his low-ranking life. After all, the king had just claimed his rejected mate. Surely Theron was claiming a known casualty, a wolf Caleb knew he could still dominate. "Stay out of this, king," Caleb spat, puffing out his chest, a pathetic display of beta defiance against an alpha king. "She was mine. I rejected her. I can unreject her, reclaim her, and you can find a real Luna." The air pressure in the square dropped so fast it felt like a vacuum had formed. King Theron set Lana down gently behind him, a massive, immovable wall of muscle and fury. Theron's face remained terrifyingly calm, but his eyes were pure molten gold. "You dared to break the bond of the moon goddess." His voice was low, a dangerous, barely contained snarl, "and now you dare to challenge my claim." Caleb, high on his own delusion and the rush of confronting the king, lunged forward, his hands twitching, attempting to grab Lana's arm. "She's flawed. She's weak. She's the Omega I broke." In a flash of movement that defied his size, King Theron intercepted him. The king didn't shift. He didn't need his beast form to annihilate this insignificant pest. The king simply moved. A lightning-fast strike connected with Caleb's jaw, sending the beta airborne, slamming him violently into the side of the blacksmith's shed. Caleb crumpled, his nose broken, stunned into silence. Theron walked toward the groaning figure, his boots crunching menacingly on the dirt. He stood over Caleb, the shadow of the king extinguishing the light around the low-ranking wolf. "The mate you rejected," Theron said, his voice cold, heavy with finality, "is the moon goddess's only gift to me. By rejecting her, you committed a sacrilege. By challenging me, you commit treason." He raised his foot, bringing the heel of his massive boot down hard on Caleb's outstretched hand. A sickening snap echoed across the silent square. Caleb screamed, a high, pathetic sound of agony. Theron knelt, his face inches from the whimpering beta. You are now marked not by rejection, but by my justice. You will tell every pack you come across that the Alpha King does not tolerate those who cause harm to his mate. You will spend the rest of your miserable life feeling the shame of challenging the one thing I value most. He rose, turning his back on the broken beta. He returned to Lana, his anger cooling instantly into protective warmth as he placed his hand on the fresh mark on her neck. Lana, who had watched the brutal public display with wide eyes, felt a strange, fierce pride. It wasn't the violence that settled her, but the absolute, undeniable declaration of her worth. Theron hadn't fought for his pride, he had fought to defend her. The trauma of her past was now a weapon in the hands of the most powerful king, wielded to erase her pain. Theron turned to the nearest pack alpha. Take this filth to the borders, exile him from the northern realms. If he is ever found again, his punishment will be death. He didn't wait for a response. He simply took Lana's hand, his grip firm and possessive. He looked at her, his golden gaze softening to a powerful protective blue. Come, Luna, he murmured. We have a kingdom to rule and a broken past to forget. The crowd finally rose, a wave of subservient wolves witnessing the absolute, reaffirmed power of the Alpha King's claim. Lana, holding the king's hand, walked toward the waiting royal transports, no longer the scarred Omega, but the fiercely defended mate. Part 3. Queen of the North. The journey to the northern citadel was a blur of speed, luxury, and overwhelming security. For Lana, who had spent 7 years deliberately seeking invisibility, being cocooned in the constant, suffocating presence of Alpha King Theron and his elite royal guard was dizzying. But beneath the anxiety, there was a profound, steadying peace. The king's love was not gentle, but it was protective, a massive, unyielding shield against the universe that had once tried to break her. The rejection had left her feeling perpetually exposed. Theron's claim left her utterly enveloped. Upon arriving at the citadel, a towering fortress of black granite and ancient magic, Lana didn't walk in as a meek refugee. She was carried. Theron kept his arm around her waist, his body a deliberate barrier, asserting her status with every step. The pack alphas and noble families who had gathered to greet their king were forced into immediate obeisance to the Luna they had never known existed. Lana had expected disdain, or at least confusion, from the king's wolves. Instead, she encountered a curious, intense reverence. Theron's pack was utterly loyal, and if their king chose a scarred, formerly rejected Omega, then the moon goddess must have had a profound reason. Lana was quickly becoming less of a consort and more of a symbol, the proof that the king was not untouchable, that he was capable of a love so fierce it could mend the broken. The first week was a psychological battle. Lana struggled with the residual effects of the rejection. Her Omega instincts screamed at her to defer, to cower, to accept that she was less than, but Theron refused to allow it. In the cavernous, opulent royal chambers, he would pin her with his penetrating, loving gaze. You are not less than, Lana. You are the only one. Your past does not define your future. You were hurt, yes, but I have claimed the wound and made it my own. He didn't need a submissive mate. He had thousands of kneeling wolves for that. He needed a queen who stood beside him, her strength forged in the very fires that tried to consume her. One evening, while standing on the wide balcony overlooking the sprawling and ancient city, Lana finally spoke the core of her fear. Theron, she whispered, leaning into his immense frame. Caleb saw me as damaged goods. What if I can't be the Luna your pack needs? They require strength, and I am a wolf who was broken once. Theron turned her in his arms, his hand resting on the back of her neck, just above the fresh mate mark. You are strength, Lana. You survived the unholiest act a wolf can commit against another, the severing of the fated bond, and you still stand. You built a life for yourself in the ashes. That is not weakness. That is endurance. His eyes softened, holding the depth of his devotion. The strength they need is not just power, but hope. You are the moon goddess's final test to me. She made me wait, lonely and feared, because only I could possess the power to fully heal you, and only you could possess the courage to love me, a king who knows only command. His words hit her with the force of a revelation. She was not a victim to be pitied. She was a survivor to be celebrated. Her rejection was not a stain, it was the story of her second chance, written by the hands of a true Alpha King. Lana's true transformation began at the first High Council meeting. The room was intimidating, dark wood, heavy furs, and the tense, expectant faces of every powerful alpha within the Northern Territory. Theron was addressing the ongoing rogue issue, his voice a commanding force. He stood at the head of the immense table, and Lana sat beside him, the first female ever to occupy that chair. A stern, aged alpha named Kalen challenged Theron on a strategic point, his eyes pointedly ignoring Lana, a clear display of disrespect to her non-status. "Your Majesty," Alpha Kalen stated, his voice condescending. "We should return to the original deployment. We must discuss this among alphas." Lana felt the familiar, automatic pull to shrink away. Then she felt Theron's hand, heavy and reassuring, settle on her knee beneath the table. It was not a cue to stay silent. It was a transfer of confidence, a silent command. "Rise." Lana straightened, her spine rod straight. She didn't raise her voice. She simply projected the quiet authority she had honed over years of solitary survival. "Alpha Kalen," she interjected, her voice clear and carrying. "The deployment you suggest leaves the southern border exposed. While the threat is currently north, the rogues' recent attacks on the outlying farms suggest a pattern of resource gathering. They are not merely raiding, they are stocking up for winter, meaning the center of the conflict will shift. We must defend the farms now to cripple their logistics." The entire room fell silent. Theron leaned back slightly, a subtle, proud smile touching the corner of his lips. Alpha Kalen was stunned. He hadn't expected the Omega to speak, let alone deliver such a strategic, cold analysis. He tried to object, but his argument dissolved under the weight of her logic. Lana had found her voice. It wasn't the powerful, rumbling command of a king, but the quiet, undeniable wisdom of a survivor and a protector. She didn't seek to dominate, she sought to secure. That night, King Theron took her in his arms, pulling her into a fierce, tender embrace. "That is my queen," he murmured against her neck, breathing in the scent of their combined, solidified bond. "You didn't just speak, Luna. You ruled." The solidification of their union was sealed not in a public ceremony, but in the quiet moments of their shared command. Lana wasn't just a figurehead. She was the missing anchor Theron never knew he needed. Where his rule was absolute dominance, hers was meticulous care. She transformed the Citadel from a war room into a home, her presence radiating a calm strength that settled the entire pack. Resolution: the former scarred Omega, Lana, stood side by side with the fierce Alpha King Theron. A month after her arrival, the entire realm knew the story. The king had not chosen a perfect Luna. He had chosen the fated Luna, proving that even the most broken destiny could be remade by a powerful love. Lana's old rejection scar was now a revered mark, a testament to the king's healing power and her own unbreakable will. Lana and Theron stood on the balcony, watching the sunset cast long, regal shadows across the ancient fortress. She leaned her head against his shoulder, no longer the timid wolf, but the confident, steady partner. 7 years I walked alone, believing I was nothing, she said softly. Theron tightened his arm around her, drawing her closer into the undeniable reality of their bond. "You were waiting for your king, Lana, and I was waiting for my queen." Their reign began not with conquest, but with second chance, ruling the North with a strength that was both dominant and deeply protective, proving that the greatest power a king can wield is the devotion to his mate.